There we go. Okay. Hi, everybody. There's a couple seats over here. If people still need seats, you can come on up. We won't bite. I'm Jeff Larson. This is from ProPublica. Intel tomorrow. And this is Christina Elmer. And we're going to talk about how we launched a multinational investigation into Facebook last year, looking at political ads on Facebook, which was a big topic, and to be honest, the media should have covered it in 2016, but better late than never. So we, as I'm sure you're all aware, we're very sort of worried and distraught over the fact that advertising political speech on Facebook had sort of had a detrimental effect in our election in the United States, and we wanted to check to see if it was happening worldwide or what was going on worldwide. Political ads on Facebook are not moderated. Currently, Facebook is starting a new program where if you're going to run a political ad, you get a postcard. But currently, they're pretty much not moderated. And by that, I mean they do go through an approval process, but that approval process is largely automatic, and anybody can run any ad that they want. In 2016, we ran an experiment in the United States where we ran an ad that was against our Fair Housing Act law that protects tenants and people who want to buy houses from discrimination. And we published an ad that was targeted to exclude African Americans, which is illegal, and it got accepted in like 10 minutes. A year later, after writing that story and Facebook promised to change things, a year later we ran a similar ad that said no African Americans, targeted at everybody except for African Americans, and we were able to run the same ad, right? Even after warning Facebook that this was going on. Political ads are largely the same. Political parties, political operatives, political groups can run ads saying pretty much whatever they want on Facebook with little to no oversight currently. They're not transparent. There's no public listing in many countries. There's in Canada, you can visit Facebook pages of political parties and see their ads they're currently running, but there's no historical archive of political ads that ran in Canada. In the United States, they promise for our midterm elections coming up that they are going to collect ads from political parties and make an archive, but just like the housing ads that we found, I'll believe it when I see it. They're often published without regard to existing laws. As we saw with the Internet Research Agency and some of the stories that we covered, we uncovered a bunch of political ads on Facebook that were, basically skirting the law. And like I mentioned before, they're often run by shady or opaque groups. The Internet Research Agency was and still is, a group operated out of Russia that was running ads aimed at promoting disinformation in our political campaign in 2016. It's not all state actors like Russia. There are also groups that we've uncovered in this experiment that we did in this series of stories. There are groups that we uncovered that no one knows who they are, running ads, against political parties or for political candidates in many countries around the world. So last year, we decided to start monitoring them. We started monitoring political ads with the help of our readers and through an international collaboration. We used many technologies. We used a little bit of machine learning. We wrote a custom browser extension, which I'll get into in a second. And a team of journalists trawling through a database that we had collected to write stories off of it. We created a browser extension that allowed people to see all of the ads that were running on their individual timelines. So it had a little bit of software that when they were logged into Facebook, that visited every post in their timeline and identified whether or not it was an ad. And we asked our readers to identify the political ads for us, whether or not something was a political ad or not. But interestingly, so if you look here on the left, those are the ads that a particular person would be seeing in their timeline. This is mine. These are ads that I saw. So I saw a Google ad. Obviously, that's not a political ad. So we asked people to rate whether or not it was political. We also showed people ads they weren't seeing from political parties. So these are American ads. The second from the left is Sherrod Brown, who's running for Congress. There's a Donald Trump ad, even though he's not running for anything. His campaign pretty much asks every single day, we catch him running an ad every single day on Facebook. And no one gets to see these ads, right? You wouldn't be able to see these ads without our extension, which is important because he's the president of the United States. So it's important to monitor, for better or for worse, it's important to monitor what he's saying on Facebook in these political ads. And then the guy on the right is running an ad. He's running for Congress, Tom Steyer, and he's running an ad that's calling for impeachment of our president. We identify the political ads both through user ratings. So we have about 6,000, no, I guess we have more than 7,000 people worldwide in a bunch of different countries who have downloaded and installed the extensions in their browsers in both Chrome and Firefox. And then we use their input to run a machine learning classifier that gives us a sense of whether or not an ad is political or not. So on the left, we use Python. We wrote a little program in Python that takes that data from a database. It tries to identify what political speech looks like in each individual country. For the nerds in the room, I want to point out that there's a very cool tweak that you can do to any classifier. It's called SMOTE. It's an academic acronym, so I apologize, it's not the coolest. But basically what it does is there are very few political ads compared to all the ads that are out there. Most of them are for like shoes or for like products or whatever. When that happens and you run a classifier against that, it's probably like 5% of the ads are political in nature. So when it happens when your training set only has 5%, you want to boost those smaller examples because any classifier is just going to guess that any particular ad is not political in nature, and you'll get an accuracy rate of 95%. So this SMOTE technique allows you to boost that signal. Okay, nerd talk over, let's continue. I want to point out that it's all open source. We very much believe, because we're doing something very sensitive here, where we're collecting information directly from people's Facebook profiles, that we're being extremely transparent with all of the code that we're using to run it. So everything from our back-end collection systems of these Facebook ads to the extension that we run in people's browsers is inspectable by anybody, so that everybody can see that we're not doing anything shady here. If there are any developers in the room, it's a huge project, and you guys can go through it, and we have a bunch of bugs listed that you can help us out with. So last year, we were actually at a conference, and we met Christina, and we launched this in Germany because they had an election coming up, and we wanted to see if it would work. And then the partnership sort of like blossomed from there. I'm going to let you go and talk about it.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to give you some insights about our constellation of this cooperation, because it's quite unusual for Germany, since our newsrooms are part of different investigative networks. I don't think if you experienced such constellations before, but Süddeutsche Zeitung and NDR are part of the ICIJ, and the Spiegel is part of the IKE network, and so cooperation amongst these partners is not that usual, so we had to convince some editors-in-chief beforehand, yeah, I think it was worth it totally, because only this way we could really reach enough users to have many people install the plugin really soon and train it, and so that it gets rich in political ads that it can show you that are not displayed in your Facebook feed. We, for example, needed a clear agreement on how we call us. We called ourselves media partners of ProPublica, so it's totally clear that the biggest part of the project is at ProPublica, at Jeff and Julia's side, and also how often we mention the setup. We said, okay, let's mention it at the launch, at the first day, and afterwards everyone can do their own investigations and their own stories, and you don't have to keep everyone in the loop. So this was our way to tackle this problem and to get through that. And yeah, in Germany, this also was regarded as a signal on how important this investigation and investigating algorithms is for us. The constellation really has attracted much attention, and we like that because, yeah, to overcome competitiveness is always a good thing, I think, especially when it comes to algorithms. So yeah, as you have heard already, the extension was developed by ProPublica, but what did we contribute to that? First of all, of course, the coordination of the partners in Germany, which is just project management, scheduling the publication, setting up a chat system and stuff like that to just communicate rather quickly, especially around the launch day. Then we wrote a new declaration of consent. I will go into that a little bit more later, which is really a crucial point of this project. And then, of course, we translated all the text modules. You see the screenshot with the extension in German. For example, we had to translate ads you see and ads you didn't see. And also we thought about the term political ad, because this can be understood quite differently, and we renamed it to election campaign ad, which is fitting in Germany as the word is rather short. We also had to test and train the extension with German ads to just train the machine learning, and also to test it in our Facebook feed. So we used it the weeks before the publication as intensively as we could, just to capture many more ads that could be shown to users when they try it out, because the first moment that you use this extension is the most important, and then they decide if they want to use it more or not. Of course, we had to do the reporting and the call for participation on our websites and on TV and radio stations and stuff like that. And yeah, afterwards, when it was running, all of us watched the incoming ads and watched the also the targeting parameters that we were collecting. And to be honest, most of them have not been that interesting that we thought they might be, because obviously German parties, parties in Germany, political parties, do not really use these possibilities really intensively. And yeah, but either way, we could find some stories, and Jeff will go into that later. The declaration of consent. You see it on the right-hand side. It's the English version. We, of course, also have translated that into German and used it in the plugin directory. And this really was a really big part of the process, I think, because 2 lawyers had to be involved on both sides. And
we hired a lawyer too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It should fit to both legal systems. And we have been advised by the NGO Algorithm Watch in Germany, because they had good experiences with crowdsourcing projects before that were alike. So, and also by our data protection officer at Der Spiegel. And the main point is, or the main question was, is the data that we store anonymous? Can it be traced back to one single user? Because then we would have to offer to delete information from one specific user if they would withdraw their consent afterwards or later in the process. And this could have really screwed up everything, because this would have needed a workflow that would be really, really huge. So but we came to the point that this is not necessary. The data that we or that ProPublica would store, the language setting of the browser, the HTML of the ad, then the targeting parameters, of course, and the classification that the user puts into the data set afterwards. This is anonymous, so we don't need this option to single out a specific user and to enable enable them to delete their data sets later. And this was a good moment in the process, because a new data protection law is coming up this year in Germany, in Europe, and this could have been quite complicated. Yeah, and after 2 weeks, we launched the extension in Germany at the beginning of September. On September 24th, we had the elections. And after 2 weeks, just a few days ahead of the general election, we had collected more than 15,000 German language ads, 600 political ads, and 50 to 60 have been coming in, or did come in every day. And this is how everyone could follow this process in the open database that Jeff published. You could see the political ad, of course, and the targeting parameters. And I think in itself, this may have contributed to more algorithmic and Facebook literacy amongst our users or amongst the people in Germany, just to be able to browse through this database and to have this transparency. Yep, and what have been our most important learnings? I think these 3 ones. In algorithmic accountability projects in general, it might not be useful to try to re-engineer the algorithm. So this is the first thing that everyone is thinking about, especially in data journalism teams. You think, well, this would be the best result to have full transparency on that, but I don't think this is really useful. There's a huge danger of getting lost within this process. So I would rather recommend to go for raising awareness. This is the most important thing, to really foster the debate, to try to increase the transparency of the algorithm's most important decision-making principles, like the points that you can then discuss and argue about if these should be changed. And of course, we are all journalists, like search for stories, for scandals, finding a bias around false positives or proving discrimination against specific user groups, as we also did. So you will see examples of that later. And the second learning, of course, collaborate whenever possible, as mentioned before, because this topic needs as much attention as possible. And the third one is involve your data protection officer quite early in the process, because the legal support is so important when it comes to crowdsourcing and to storing personal data sets. And you have so many different requirements. You can perhaps give us more examples from different countries. And also because, the data protection officer at Der Spiegel, for example, he's part of the legal department, and they are really trying to expand the scope of action that we have as data journalists. And it was really insightful and fun to just involve him into the process. So I would recommend to do this quite early.
Yeah, that was a huge conversation. I mean, as privacy-minded journalists ourselves at ProPublica, we have sort of like a moral obligation to do it, but the back and forth when doing an international investigation, especially with increased data protection laws in Europe, was really eye-opening. We had to be very careful about what we did when we were scraping, how the extension was entirely set up, and we had multiple rounds with multiple lawyers and making sure that the disclosure that we set up when people signed up was both human readable, so everybody knew what they were getting into, and then also had, you know, sort of a legal sort of standard setup that we weren't being unclear about it. So if you're doing any sort of like browser extension or crowdsourcing, it's a good, even if you're an American journalist or whatever, it's a good idea to get your lawyer set up very early on, because we are asking for a lot of trust in what we're doing, right? Especially when, the whole Cambridge Analytica scandal, what they did is they set up a quiz on Facebook, probably had a terms of service, and then broke that. So you want to make sure that, number one, you're as transparent as possible if you can by open sourcing exactly what you're doing, and then also making sure that for those folks who are not technically minded, that you have a set of rules that you're setting up on how you're going to operate the project and exactly what information you're going to collect. So that German partnership was sort of a trial run for us, which over the years, as we've done partnerships, because ProPublica, we do partnerships all the time. When we're trying to start on an ambitious project, what we like to have is a trial run, right? If this thing totally blew up for us, sorry, you guys were the guinea pigs, and it just completely and totally didn't work, then we wouldn't expand to more countries. But thankfully, it was great, and we found a lot of stories, and we had a lot of impact on day one in a country that we don't usually cover, right? We don't, at ProPublica, we're an American news organization. We focus on impact in the United States. So we wanted to keep collecting stories around the world because Facebook is a global company, right? They may be headquartered in the United States, but they have so many users around the world. And we wanted to have a database of ads collected in, as many countries as possible. So we quickly, after we did the experiment in Germany, we very quickly realized we needed a way to onboard folks in other countries and other languages very quickly. So we set up an onboarding, frequently asked questions to quickly scale up the investigation. So it really only takes a single email to a shared email address that we all have to get somebody set up. Someone says, hey, I want in on the project. They email us, and we send them back this international document. And it has clearly defined steps. Not only, what do we collect, what don't we collect? It also has defined steps for the things that you need to do as a media organization to get your users to start using the tool. Now, the benefit of signing on as a media organization is that you get a pretty sophisticated dashboard on the back end to browse through the political ads that we've collected to find, which we're working on and improving every single day, to find the political ads that may contain stories. The only thing that we ask media organizations to do, and a handful of them have done after Germany, is we ask them to set up their own dashboards. So we provide an API so that graphics people and developers at other media organizations can ingest that and show the ads to users. And I'll show you an example of that later. We also ask, because I only speak English, we ask for a little bit of translation work, and we also ask folks just to run, once we get it all set up and tested in each individual country, we ask them to run Just a call out to get people interested, right, on their websites. Hey, we're doing this investigation with ProPublica. It takes 5 minutes to install it in your browser. You'll be able to see the ads that you're not being targeted from politicians, and you'll be able to see the ads that you are being targeted for, which is a personal thing for folks. Like, I feel like the story, one of the stories, as Christina mentioned, one of the most eye-opening stories is the fact that you're not seeing all political speech when you browse the internet, right? And advertising and ad targeting, it's very interesting to be able to see, hey, this politician, you know, thinks I like Jon Stewart, so I'm getting one message. But all of these other messages that are out there, I will never see if I browse Facebook. On a very base level, that has been a story in every country where we looked. We've since partnered with organizations in 11 other countries and collected tens of thousands of political ads. I want to point out that it's not just news organizations. We have the National Library of Sweden is one of our partners. As long as you have a publishing platform or the ability to get the word out, we're game. And, you know, some semblance of like that you're going to, you know, handle the data ethically. We actually have a guy from OpenPolis who was one of our partners. Do you want to come up and say a few words about what you guys found?
Hi, I'm Daniele from OpenPolis. I was not prepared to this, so bear with me. So yeah, OpenPolis is actually, we're based in Italy. We're an Italian civic hacking political watchdog. We're not really a media agency. We're not a newspaper. We believe in data and in making data transparent, especially political data. So when we saw this project that was launched in end of 2017, we figured there was elections in Italy coming up in March of 2018. So we said this is the perfect opportunity to do something really useful for the political community. So we launched it in Italy. And it was actually very interesting because we had two concerns mainly, and I'll be really brief. The first concern was for the users. At least we figured out that in Italy, very few people know that their actions on Facebook contribute to a profiling of users, and that profiling is what is used by Facebook, but also Google and several other internet companies to sell advertisements. And so we understood that a lot of users in Italy had no idea this happened. So part of our project was explaining to our readers and Italian newspapers that everything we do online contributes to creating our profile, and that profile is used to sell a product. And it's something that is completely legal in some ways for companies, but it's something a lot of people don't know. And we thought it was very interesting because when you match this to politics, it's a completely different game. Because obviously, especially during electoral campaigns, it's fundamental that every single ad that is paid by politicians is completely open and transparent to citizens. And we, as a political watchdog, our main concern was, in Italy, there's specific laws that regulate political campaigns, meaning that every single board or manifest on the streets has to say, this ad was paid by X political party. And as you all know, that's not the case on Facebook. Another example is that in Italy, the day of the election and the day before the election, politicians are not allowed to give public statements regarding the election. And obviously, on Facebook and on Twitter or all other social platforms, they're allowed to do whatever they want. So our other issue, besides informing users, was also campaigning with government and asking government to adapt electoral campaign laws to the internet. And it's something for us, it was a very interesting adventure. And just to prove that this process was very easy, I emailed Jeff maybe at the end of 2017. I met the guy an hour ago, and we launched the project in a completely transparent, easy, and quick way. And it was a very satisfying process for us because it allowed us to experiment something new, and the collaborative approach that journalism needs to have in Italy, or at least in all countries in the world, it was a great success. And just one last thing, for us it was very interesting because ads on Facebook, political ads on Facebook or on Twitter or all other social media, it's a huge universe, and it's something that it's very hard to understand, it's very hard to monitor, because it doesn't only travel on official streets, there's also unofficial roads, and there's also side pages that are not run by political parties that do advertising, political advertising, and that's something that is very hard to analyze because it's such a broad stream that it's very hard to analyze it in a complete way. But start talking about the issue and start telling people how things actually are working. It's very important because people need to be more aware, and especially government institutions have a chance to finally adapt laws that are actually in place to the internet, which is nowadays the first medium that politicians and political parties use to do electoral campaigns.
Didn't you find a shady political group too?
Yeah. One of the things our main goal was to only analyze political parties and political candidates because it was the easiest and most circumscribed batch of pages we could look at. But some things ended up in the political ad collector that were very funny. Just one example, there's a page in Italy that in Italy it's very famous, and it's called Homer Simpson for Prime Minister, and it's around 2010, 2011, it used to post a lot of funny memes about Homer Simpson and how his approach to life should be the approach to life that a prime minister should have, very chilled and funny, and how Homer Simpson is. And that page was silent for years. Nobody ever posted anything on that page for years. And eventually, the month before the election, it started posting political ads against the Five Star Movement, which is, as some of you may know, the main political party nowadays in Italy, and which is something very weird because for the first time we had the chance to track down unofficial pages that did political advertising in a completely legal way. Why is this a problem? Because there's rules in every single country to moderate political advertising. So when you have a media tool that allows unofficial parties to do political advertising, and they can do it in a completely free way without disclosing who's financing this information and who's financing this ad, it's obvious that we have a problem. And again, something we want to make clear with our users, it's the government responsibility to make sure this is made more transparent. And our purpose in this project was to bug a government and make sure that when next elections come up, citizens are aware of what are the political ads that are run on Facebook.
Thanks, man. So I'm just going to go through a bunch of stories that we found. Most of them are going to be ours because, again, I don't read any other languages. But there's a couple partner stories in here. So in Germany, we found a collection of ads run by a party called Greenwatch, or run by some sort of shady, opaque group called Greenwatch. And Greenwatch had this weird thing where they looked like the Green Party. All of their ads were green, they were cartoon, they were slickly produced. They were cartoonish, they were slickly produced, but if you actually went through to the linked blog post, their slogan was "The Greens must be crazy," and it was all about how we need more nuclear power, electric cars are bad, and a bunch of other stuff. But no one knew who they were, and on the eve of the election, the group completely disappeared from the internet. So their web presence disappeared, their Facebook page disappeared, all of their ads disappeared. And we actually sent somebody to ring the doorbell, and they weren't there. They had done this same thing in a previous election, and the Green Party had actually gone to the government and it was like, guys, you got to shut this down. And then it happened again during the main election. And It's a little bit unclear. They give us it's close to skirting the law, like, you know, being a shady group. Like, you have to be registered, or I don't know. Yeah.
You have to be, but it was really unclear if this also is a question for Facebook. I mean, they, as stated there have been warnings against them, so maybe they could have regulated this, but it was totally not transparent in this case.
Yeah, the Green Party did go to Facebook and said, hey, you guys need to stop this, right? This is clearly a shady group that just like showed up in a previous election and then it immediately disappeared, and they're going to do it again. And we saw it happen. The German election season is very short, right? It's like,
yeah, the hot weeks have been like 4 weeks, and then everyone started campaigning on Facebook, and so, but we did not have months of campaigns, no.
Yeah, it's not like in the United States. I think we got 50 to 60 ads in Germany a day during the campaign, and then we got 0 for weeks that were political. But in the United States, they're running ads all the time. So another shady group that we found, we partnered with The Guardian in Australia, and they have had recently there's been a sort of a referendum regarding homosexuality there, and there's been a lot of shady groups running anti-homosexuality and LGBTQ ads on Facebook. But we also found the journalists in Australia found this weird group, Adani, which was doing some internecine politics, which, again, I don't really understand the Australian government, but it's a similar sort of thing to the German ads. So they were posting a bunch of weird political propaganda. It didn't say who it was published by necessarily, other than it was linked to a page that was linked to this shady group. What often happens when you're doing an investigation, though, is you start going down weird roads that didn't necessarily, wasn't necessarily what you were looking for, right? So in my approach to data journalism is, in journalism in general, is you have a hypothesis, right? And you want to test that hypothesis. And so our hypothesis was we're going to find politicians saying one thing to one group of people and another thing to another group of people. Unfortunately, we haven't found that yet. We're still looking. But we started digging around in the database, and we saw a bunch of political-based ads that were like, click here if you like Hillary, or click here if you like Trump, or, you know, you'll never believe what Ivanka Trump said to Donald Trump. You know, all of these really crazy, over-the-top sort of political messages. And when you click through to them, the site that you clicked through to would try and hack your computer. Your browser would get really slow. It would pop up a 1-800 number that was like, you need to call Dell tech support right now because your computer's been completely hacked. It would play like a warning message in an MP3 over it. And your computer would get slower and slower and slower until it crashed. We did a bunch of reporting on this. The funny thing is, the first time that I saw one of these ads, I clicked on it and I immediately shut my computer down because I didn't want to get hacked. And then I was like, and then when I went back to it, the site was gone, right? So I was like, well, there's a story gone. And I kept on looking for the same behavior, and I found it 2 or 3 more times. When we dug into this behavior, it's called clickjacking or browser hijacks. When we dug into that behavior, we noticed that there had been years of warnings that Facebook had about exactly this behavior, right? That these ads that are running on Facebook are a public danger. You know, they're based on scamming people out of their money. They can cause damage to your private property. And Facebook has been continually warned about this. They wrote a blog post earlier in 2017 about how they were going to use AI to fix this problem. But we found it late in 2017, so clearly it's still a very serious problem about tracking down this malware. What we also found was we found complete and total scams. So you'd click through and you'd click through some salacious headline or some political ad, and you'd end up on a site that looks like a reputable news site, like CNN or MSNBC, and it would say something crazy like Kellyanne Conway, who is our communications director at the White House, quit her job to sell skin cream, and it would be this whole news article, fake news article that looks like, or false news, I'm not allowed to say fake news anymore, false news, that was like about how Kellyanne Conway threw things at Donald Trump, stormed out, and started her own skin cream line, and you need to buy it right now. And there was like a fake ad about, oh, I can't remember, like there was a James Comey was selling vitamins. There's a whole series of them that are hilarious to read. Willie Nelson was selling weed pills. Just a bunch of scams to scam people out of their money, which again, right, it's not what we started out for. We didn't look for political ads. I mean, we were looking for political ads. These ads were flagged as political by our classifier because they are political speech, but they were focused solely on scamming people out of their hard-earned money. And also, it's a public sort of like safety issue. Scams and malware percolating on the internet, if it's very cheap to reach millions of people with these ads via Facebook's targeting, and you only get one or two with those 1-800 numbers who are buying the pills or the skin cream, that can be a lot of money for someone who's running these scams, but also is also can ruin the people's lives who do get scammed. And this goes back to my initial point, which was these ads aren't monitored, right? It was very clear as soon as we saw this ad and we clicked on it, it was very clear that it was a scam ad, fake news site. So when someone runs an ad on Facebook, they're pretty much always approved, unless you're selling Bitcoin, I guess. We also found politicians that were ignoring campaign laws. So in the United States, it's required that you say at the bottom of your message, sort of like in Italy, even when you're running digital ads, that this was paid for by such and such committee, or paid for by the politicians' political action committee that they are doing. And we did a bunch of we found that a large portion of the ads running on Facebook didn't have disclosures in them, which is, against the law. We also, again in the Guardian Australia, they found a bunch of ads that weren't following campaign laws there, anti-LGBT groups, Adani and Malcolm Trumbull were all running ads on Facebook and not disclosing where those ads were coming from, which was against the law. And then we found straight up illegal ads. This is another example of when we started the project, we were going to focus on political ads because political speech was really, really important. But what we noticed was in the ads that weren't necessarily political, we found a bunch of companies that were running ads that were discriminating against older workers, which in the United States, you can't say, you can't run an ad that says, coffee barista must be 18 to 25. That is against the law under our EEOC, which is the Equal something Opportunity Commission. Sorry, but it's part of our civil rights law. Companies can be fined, millions of dollars, and we found, I think, 41 companies that were saying we found police departments that were saying you can only be 18 to 35. We found We found tech companies saying that we don't want anybody working for us older than 35 years old. We found people who package wheat saying we only want people who are 20 to 30, which is all illegal under current law. And it was sort of a really devastating story for a lot of people out there. In terms of impact, all of our, let's see, when Zuckerberg was on in front of Congress just a few days ago, key senators like Cory Booker and other Democratic senators grilled him about all of the stuff that we found last year on Facebook, about abusive ad targeting, housing, employment discrimination. We also found a bunch of hate speech on Facebook. So that was sort of fun to watch. And then we also, earlier this year, the AARP, which is the American Association of Retirees, filed a lawsuit against Facebook to end the discriminatory practices that they were doing in terms of age. And we also got a bunch of senators to write letters to Facebook to do that. The other story that I mentioned very early on about how we ran ads that were that said that that targeted that excluded African Americans for housing ads. A bunch of lawyers, a coalition of lawyers, kept on running those ads for months and months after Facebook said that they would fix them, and have recently launched a massive lawsuit against Facebook to get them to at least try and monitor these ads when it comes to housing and for rent, which is required by law. If you try and run in that story, in our first story, we actually went to the ad review department at the New York Times, and we said, if an ad like this showed up at the New York Times, what would happen? And the guy who reviews every single ad that appears on the New York Times said, I would never speak to them again, and I wouldn't take their money, and I probably would report that they're trying to do that. So it's just sort of a difference in the way Silicon Valley operates than other, more traditional advertisers. And finally, this is a call out. If any of you all have media organizations and you want access to the dashboard, you guys can go ahead and email us at adcollector@propublica.org. And I realized I just talked really, really quickly through all of that. So we have tons of times for questions and advice, and feelings. We're gonna get, I think we have to get this.
You need to wait for the mic.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm interested in the results for the German part of the investigation. Apart from these shady German watch-like groups, have there been any instances of the official political parties being involved in unlawful practices?
Not really. We saw a little bit of regionalization in those targeting parameters, like especially for populist parties, but. Yeah, in general, I was really surprised that they did not do more targeting in their campaigns. I mean, it's really, really easy to just talk to specific groups of voters, but most of the ads really did not target any specific groups. Yeah. But they're, regionalization. This was the main thing in Germany.
And it was surprising to me that after the election, literally, political ads just shut down for like a couple weeks. Like that would never happen in the United States. There have been a couple fly-by-night groups running anti-immigration ads. There's like a group called StopExtremism.eu that is kind of wild. But yeah, it was relatively clean outside of localized targeting in Germany.
If I may pose a follow-up question, which I find surprising because especially in Germany, the AFP is so active, and you read so much about their hate speech on Facebook, but that is not being pushed with ads. This is just organic traffic, or.
Well, with the localization, it was pushed a little bit. I mean, they refer to accidents in regions, or this was really also populistic campaigning ads that we found. This was, it was hard to really scandalize that, but yeah, they acted like they do. Yeah.
Hi, Marina Callan from Centre for Investigative Journalism in London. Just out of interest, when you were doing all this search of sort of fake accounts and hate speech kind of adverts, are they always the usual suspects? I mean, you say stuff anti-LGBTQ. Are they the other way around, or is it just tends to be the sort of right-wing stuff? Are there, like, I don't know, were there ads by fake accounts by LGBTQ community targeting the other way around, or is it always kind of one way?
Yeah, I can't speak to how the Guardian has approached it, right? Like that was one of the things that we say is hey, like Christina pointed out, we're not going to do any pre-review of stories or anything like that, right? Like here is how to get set up. So in Germany, the Greenwatch one, really, that's literally all we saw, right? Like that was, we saw a bunch of people that were doing regional targeting. But all in all, it was a pretty clean election. Also, we had a very compressed time frame that we weren't really seeing much so we didn't get, we got 15,000 ads, 600 of which were political, which is, I think, a drop in the bucket of what actually went on. So if we were a little bit more established, maybe in the upcoming elections, we'll see more things that happen on the other side. I will say that the Facebook message, all of the politicians that were skirting the law in the United States in terms of disclosures, Donald Trump always does disclosures paid for Donald Trump. Kamala Harris, who is a very left-leaning senator in the United States, never does disclosures. And for older workers from job ads, there were a bunch of left-leaning nonprofits that were also excluding based on age. So it really runs the gamut. So everybody, it's a free-for-all out there on Facebook.
Hello. Ireland is in the middle of a referendum at the moment, a referendum campaign for repealing an amendment for abortion. We're already seeing Facebook ads coming paid for by US and UK-based organizations or individuals because there's a loophole in our law that allows that to happen because they haven't updated legislation. The other thing that we've seen is that YouTube is becoming a vector for the same types of behaviors, particularly on pre-roll ads on YouTube, which are not necessarily trackable using this kind of technology. Is there any suggestions for how you pursue non-Facebook related ads?
Stay tuned. So I'm starting a new news organization. We have a lot of ideas about building more browser extensions for other sites, and YouTube is definitely one of the ones that we want to sort of like go after.
Hi, JJ Robinson from Open Society Foundation's journalism program. How could you tell with your browser extension that you had sort of a reflection of the demographics you were looking for? I mean, the types of people who say would help ProPublica might be in a different box to maybe the types of people who'd get, pro AFP advertising, for instance?
So we were very clear that this is a very self-selecting audience up front, and we're very clear in our fact that this is not a statistical sample by any stretch of the imagination. You know, when you go and look at our public database, it is a lot of sort of more liberal causes than Republican causes. Now, that being said, we have started running ads on Facebook targeting conservative users to get them to install our extension, you know, and save democracy or whatever. And we've also set up a microsite that says ProPublica at the very bottom. In an effort to try and even out the sort of like the types of ads that we are collecting. We do have quite a few. We can sort of infer our demographics. We are sort of coastal heavy right now. We can infer them from the targeting information. We don't, like we said, we very, very much it was very important for us to not collect any identifying information, right? Both for legal reasons and also because it is a sensitive thing to be going through people's timelines. But we get the targeting information that each individual ad was targeted to, so we can see sort of a demographic breakdown of what we have. And while we do have people in coastal regions, we actually do have quite a fair number of people who identify or who Facebook has identified as conservative. So we do see a lot of, Donald Trump ads targeted at conservatives, anti-gun control ads targeted at conservatives. I would still say there's an imbalance. Every time I do one of these projects, I did one in 2012 about collecting political emails from candidates to look for, A/B testing and targeting, and we got far more political emails from the Obama campaign than we did from the Romney campaign. It's just sort of like, you work with the audience you have. But that being said, even back then, we were able to see a comparable amount of emails targeted at Romney campaign. So we're actively working on. We're actively working on sort of trying to tip that scale a little bit more towards conservative audiences, and spread the good word to expand the uses of this tool in the United States.
We also try to involve more conservative colleagues into the testing and training process at the beginning. There are some conservatives at the Spiegel editorship, so we just try to convince them to take part so that we have some more different and also conservative ads in the database from the start. Yeah. Okay, one more.
One more question.
The last one.
So I have seen that invitation to download. So I saw that invitation to download the browser extension, and I like ProPublica, but I was concerned about privacy and not understanding what sort of data was being collected and what that would mean. So as someone who is already inclined to be a supporter and yet still has some concerns over what exactly it means, how can you help allay those concerns and maybe, for future projects, try to do that in a way that will get more users to use that browser extension? So
when you install the browser extension, before it even starts collecting anything, you see this, you see this text, right? It does nothing when you install it. You see this text where you can read through it. In both of the app stores, we give you this text that is purposely written in non-legalese, that is written in very clear, we think very clear. We'd love suggestions if it's not. Very clear, very simple language about what exactly it is we collect. And we have said in every single one of our stories that we don't collect any personally identifying information from you. We only collect the HTML, and we also clean the HTML of any sort of identifiers that Facebook uses internally. So we clean things like tracking links, we clean things like their internal hit counts, we clean everybody, you know, if one of your friend likes the ad, we delete their name. There's a lot of work that goes into making sure that it's not personally identifiable in any sort of the way. The other thing that we do is we don't collect multiple versions of the ad, right? So if we see the ad again, we just increment a hit counter in like, so that's also privacy preserving. And many ads, we see there are especially the most popular parties or when there's an election, those numbers, the hit counter numbers will be like, you know, in the thousands. We get thousands of people who saw that ad.
It's really optimized with German data protection law, so it should be rather waterproof.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time on it.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time on doing that. All right, guys, that's it.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, we're done.